The hushed reverence of the auction house back room before a record sale was a particular kind of quiet, one laced with the nervous energy of impending transactions and the weight of history. I preferred it to the public spectacle. Here, under the glare of focused lamps, the true stories of objects whispered. My gloved fingers traced the intricate filigree of a Bronze Age ceremonial dagger, its patina the color of dried blood and ancient earth. The auction house owner, a portly man whose tailored suit seemed perpetually on the verge of bursting, hovered beside me, his breath held. "Remarkable, isn't it, Seth?" he murmured, finally exhaling. "The provenance is impeccable." "Impeccable doesn't mean genuine," I countered, my voice low, not looking up. My thumb brushed a minute imperfection near the hilt. Though in this case, you might be right. The metal felt cold, heavy with centuries. I could almost feel the ghost of a hand gripping it, the intention behind its creation. My specialty wasn't just bones. It was the stories bones told and the objects that accompanied them, that defined them. Every scratch, every faint impression, was a word in a forgotten language. This dagger, however, spoke of authentic antiquity. It was a masterpiece of its era. Just as I was about to confirm my assessment, my phone vibrated in my pocket, a jarring intrusion into the sanctum of the past. I excused myself, stepping away from the anxious owner and the dagger, pulling out the device. The caller ID showed a number I recognized. Detective Miller. Rarely did he call for anything less than significant. "Seth, it's Miller." The detective's voice was gruff, devoid of preamble. "Got a situation. Blackwood Manor. You know the place?" Blackwood Manor. A sprawling, isolated estate, notorious for its labyrinthine history and the generations of reclusive scholars who had called it home. "I do," I replied, my gaze drifting to a display case holding Roman coins, each one a tiny disk of time. "What's happened?" "Dr. Alistair Finch," Miller said, and I felt a prickle of unease. Finch was a celebrated historian, a towering figure in the academic world, known for his controversial theories on pre-Roman British settlements. He's dead. Appears to be a fall from the West Terrace. Nasty business. And your particular talents? They're needed. My mind immediately began sifting through data. Finch's age, his known physical condition, the layout of Blackwood Manor. An accidental fall from a terrace. It was plausible, certainly, especially for a man in his later years, perhaps lost in thought, distracted. But Miller's call suggested he didn't buy the easy answer, and neither did I, not entirely. My expertise lay in seeing what others missed, in reconstructing narratives from fragments. "I'm on my way," I confirmed, ending the call. The auction house owner looked at me, questioning. "Duty calls?" I offered, giving him a tight nod. "The dagger is genuine, by the way, a rare piece." His relief was palpable, but my thoughts were already miles away, speeding towards Blackwood Manor. The drive was long, winding through increasingly dense woodland, the asphalt eventually giving way to a gravel track that snaked towards the estate. It looked less like a home and more like a fortress, a place designed to keep the world out and its secrets in. A single police cruiser and an unmarked sedan were parked haphazardly near the main entrance, their flashing lights casting a pallid glow on the stone façade. Miller met me at the edge of the cordoned-off terrace, his face etched with fatigue. He was a man who trusted evidence more than pronouncements, a trait I respected. "Thanks for coming, Seth," he said, gesturing towards the scene. "They've already moved the remains to a temporary holding facility on the grounds, awaiting your input. The local constable here," he nodded towards a uniformed officer who stood stiffly by the tape, "is convinced it's an open and shut case." The West Terrace overlooked a steep, rocky decline that ended in a tangle of overgrown shrubs and brambles. The ground below was uneven, a mix of loose soil, fallen leaves, and exposed granite. It was indeed a treacherous spot. I approached the edge of the terrace, my eyes taking in the details. The stone balustrade was waist-high, sturdy, not something one would easily topple over. A small, ornate garden table and 2 chairs sat undisturbed nearby. No sign of a struggle, no overturned furniture. Too neat. Where exactly was he found? I asked, turning to the constable, whose skepticism of my presence was almost palpable. About 20 feet down, Professor, the constable said, pointing with a gloved hand. Head trauma, broken neck. Clear fall. I nodded, my attention shifting to the ground immediately below the terrace. The autumn leaves were thick, a rustling carpet. I knelt, pushing aside the leaves, and embedded within it, tiny, almost imperceptible fragments. Not just rootlets, but something else. Something older. Something anachronistic. It felt almost silty, richer than anything naturally occurring on this granite-strewn slope. And the fragments, they weren't plant matter. My gaze sharpened. This was not the soil of Blackwood Manor's west terrace, and those fragments certainly weren't from this century. My internal alarm bells, usually a faint chime, began to ring with insistent clarity. An accidental fall? Perhaps. But Dr. Finch, the historian obsessed with ancient cultures, had seemingly carried a piece of history with him to his death. A piece that didn't belong here. This was no simple accident. This was a story, and I was just beginning to read its first unsettling sentence. It was soil, dark and rich, clumped together in a way that suggested it hadn't simply been kicked up by a falling body. I scooped a small sample into a sterile bag, my gaze sweeping across the ground again. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. Above me, the grand manor loomed, its stone façade indifferent to the tragedy it had witnessed. "Anything of interest, Seth?" the lead detective asked, his voice low, a polite query rather than a demand. He stood a few feet back, respecting my space, his gaze sharp beneath the brim of his hat. "Possibly," I replied, rising slowly. My attention shifted to the deceased historian, Dr. Finch, who lay where he had fallen, a crumpled figure at the base of the terrace. The body had been carefully covered, but I could still discern the awkward angle of a limb, the unnatural stillness. The initial report cited a tragic accident, a slip, a fall from the terrace above. My gut, however, had begun to hum with discord. I moved closer, a colleague already there, meticulously photographing the scene. The historian's tweed jacket was torn, his trousers scuffed. I knelt again, my gloved hands hovering over the remains. I began my external examination, a methodical process of observation and palpation. The reported fall trajectory, a mere 12 feet, should have presented certain impact patterns, predictable fractures from the collision with the hard ground. My fingers traced the man's skull, feeling for depressions, for the telltale give of bone. Nothing immediately obvious. I moved to the limbs. The left arm, twisted beneath him, showed a compound fracture of the ulna and radius, consistent with an outstretched hand attempting to break a fall. But as I ran my thumb along the clavicle, then the ribs, I noted a subtle absence. There was no pronounced crushing injury to the chest, no significant compression fractures to the spine that a fall of this nature, especially on solid ground, often inflicted. It was the specific angles of the impact points, or rather, the lack of them in expected areas, that stirred my forensic anthropologist's intuition. A fall from a height typically results in axial loading, force transmitted up the spine. While there were fractures, their distribution felt incomplete, as if the primary force wasn't a direct vertical impact, but something else, something prior to hitting the ground. I made a mental note for the full examination. These weren't macroscopic anomalies, but the kind of microscopic bone trauma that only careful dissection and imaging would confirm. Minute fractures, stress lines, subtle bone bruising that would reveal a different story. My gaze drifted from the body to the immediate environment, specifically the historian's clothing. The tweed jacket, despite its tears, had a fine, almost imperceptible sheen in places. I leaned in, my nose close to the fabric. It wasn't dust from the manor's ancient stone, nor common garden soil. I pulled out a small magnifying glass from my kit. Under magnification, the sheen resolved into countless tiny particles, glittering faintly. They weren't fibrous, not organic. They were crystalline, angular, catching the diffused light. I scraped a minute sample into another sterile bag. The color was a pale, almost ethereal blue-gray, unlike anything I had ever encountered in a typical domestic or outdoor environment. This wasn't local geology. This was foreign. Ancient, perhaps, given the historian's profession. The implications hit me with the force of a physical blow. Microscopic bone fractures inconsistent with the fall, and now this unique mineral dust. This wasn't an accident. This was a setup. A brutal deception. Someone had put Dr. Finch on that terrace, or thrown him. And the mineral dust, whatever it was, linked him to another location, another element entirely. My mind raced, sifting through geological databases, historical texts. A specific type of ancient sarcophagus? An archaeological dig site? Then a flicker. A memory of a recent conversation, a hushed rumor among collectors. A record-breaking auction, scheduled for later that day, featuring a collection of exceptionally rare, historically significant artifacts. One particular item, a sarcophagus fragment believed to be from a previously undiscovered Egyptian tomb, had been generating significant buzz. And the descriptions of its provenance, its unique geological inclusions, began to align with the faint blue-gray glimmer I'd just scraped from the historian's jacket. I stood, my jaw tight. "I need to make a phone call," I told the detective, my voice sharper than intended. "And then I need to go somewhere, immediately." The detective raised an eyebrow but nodded. He knew my methods, trusted my instincts. "Where to, Seth?" "An auction house," I stated, the words feeling out of place amidst the ancient trees and the still body. I navigated through the bustling streets, my mind a whirlpool of theories. I bypassed the main entrance, heading directly to the service alley, flashing my credentials to a wary security guard. "Forensic anthropologist on official business," I stated, my voice firm. "I need access to the back room, specifically to the items slated for the Egyptian antiquities sale." The security guard, a burly man with a permanent scowl, made a call. Moments later, a thin, impeccably dressed man, the auctioneer himself, emerged, his expression a mixture of annoyance and curiosity. "We're minutes from the main event, colleague. This is highly irregular." "Irregular circumstances," I countered, holding his gaze. "It involves a matter of authenticity, linked to a developing investigation. I assure you, any delay will be minimal." I didn't elaborate, letting the weight of my presence and my role do the talking. He sighed, running a hand over his slicked back hair. "Very well. But you touch nothing without my supervision." He led me through a maze of corridors, past crates and trolleys laden with treasures, the air thick with the scent of old wood and anticipation. We entered a large, brightly lit back room. Here, the most valuable pieces were meticulously arranged, bathed in spotlights, ready for their grand unveiling. Security cameras whirred softly from every corner. My eyes immediately scanned the room, bypassing the glittering jewels and Renaissance paintings. I sought out the section devoted to ancient artifacts. There it was, the sarcophagus fragment, encased in a climate-controlled display, its ancient hieroglyphs vibrant under the light. But it wasn't the carvings that held my attention. It was the faint, almost invisible residue clinging to the edges of the display case, and more tellingly, to the protective foam padding within the shipping crate that still sat nearby. I pulled out my portable forensic light and miniature magnification lens. The auctioneer watched, arms crossed, as I meticulously examined the faint blue-gray dust. It was unmistakable. The same unique mineral composition, the same ethereal shimmer. It was here, and it was on Dr. Finch. The colleague, a man whose patience was as thin as his hairline, finally relented. He gestured vaguely toward the back of the estate, a reluctant concession. "Fine, but if you're not out of here by the time the first gavel drops, I'm calling the chief administrator myself." I gave him a nod, a silent acknowledgement of his grudging cooperation, and turned toward the temporary laboratory setup I'd commandeered. The estate's owner, a collector with an impressive array of antiquities, had been less than thrilled to have a forensic anthropologist disrupting his meticulously planned record sale. But the unusual circumstances surrounding the prominent historian's death had afforded me a rare, if temporary, leverage. Fluorescent lights cast a harsh glare on the sterile surfaces. A junior technician, a young woman with a perpetually worried expression, looked up as I entered. Her gloved hands were poised over a microscope. "Seth," he began, his voice barely a whisper, "I think you'll want to see this." I leaned over the eyepiece, adjusting the focus. The field of view resolved into a mosaic of crystalline structures. The mineral dust from the historian's boots? "Precisely," she confirmed, pointing with a slender probe. "It's a unique aggregate, mostly sericite, which isn't uncommon in certain geological regions, but it's the trace elements that are fascinating. There's a previously uncatalogued silicate and microscopic inclusions of cinnabar. The specific crystalline structure, it's a signature. We cross-referenced it with geological surveys and mineralogical databases. There's only one known terrestrial deposit with this exact composition." My gaze sharpened. "Where?" She tapped a finger on a tablet, bringing up a topographical map. A red pin blinked over a remote, heavily forested region approximately 300 miles north of our current location. An unsanctioned archaeological dig site, according to some obscure environmental impact assessments from a decade ago. It was abandoned shortly after, deemed too unstable for sustained work. But the geological profile matches perfectly. A cold thread of certainty tightened in my chest. The historian, Dr. Finch, had been researching something secretive, something that demanded his presence in such a remote, perilous location. His tragic fall was looking less like an accident with every passing moment. "Get me a vehicle," I told her, standing upright. "And a satellite map of that area. I need to be there." The journey was a grueling affair. The paved roads eventually gave way to gravel, then to little more than overgrown logging trails. My borrowed utility vehicle, usually relegated to transporting equipment, groaned under the strain. The landscape grew progressively wilder, ancient pines towering on either side, their branches interwoven into a dense canopy that filtered the sunlight into dappled patterns. The air, crisp and damp, carried the scent of pine needles and damp earth. Dr. Finch's recent reclusiveness, his hushed phone calls, the anachronistic details I'd found on the body. It all pointed to this forgotten scar on the earth. Why would a renowned historian be involved in an illegal dig? What artifact could be so significant that it warranted such secrecy, such risk? After hours of driving, the satellite map indicated I was close. I left the vehicle hidden amongst a thicket of firs and continued on foot, pushing through dense undergrowth. The terrain was uneven, littered with fallen branches and slick, moss-covered rocks. Then, through a break in the trees, I saw it. A clearing, oddly out of place in the pristine wilderness. A makeshift shelter, crudely constructed from tarpaulins stretched over saplings, stood lopsidedly. The earth around it was disturbed, churned up, and a large, partially backfilled trench snaked across the ground, hastily covered with deadfall and loose soil. This was it, the unsanctioned archaeological dig site. It looked abandoned, but recent boot prints in the soft earth suggested otherwise. The air hung heavy with a stale, metallic scent, like old tools and disturbed earth. I approached cautiously, my senses alert. No one was here now, but the signs of recent activity were undeniable. Shovels lay against the shelter, still caked with damp soil. I surveyed the scene, taking mental notes, before turning my attention to my next lead. Dr. Finch's estranged research assistant. Locating the assistant had required a call to a former colleague, leveraging a few favors and a carefully worded explanation about a preliminary inquiry into Finch's research. The assistant, a younger man named Ben, had left Finch's employ abruptly several months prior, citing irreconcilable differences. He lived in a small, weathered cottage on the outskirts of a logging town, a place that felt miles away from the academic world Finch inhabited. The smell of linseed oil and sawdust filled the air. He looked up, startled, as I stepped into the doorway, blocking the sliver of evening light. His hands froze on the wood. "Seth, we need to talk about Dr. Finch." He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. He avoided my gaze, focusing instead on the tools scattered across his bench. "I don't know what I can tell you. I haven't worked for him in months." "I'm aware," I said, stepping further into the garage, letting the door swing shut behind me. "But you were his assistant for years. You knew his projects, his obsessions. And I believe you know about the site north of here." His head snapped up, a flicker of fear in his eyes. The old quarry? He used to take me there sometimes for geological samples. Nothing more." His voice was shaky, too quick. I crossed my arms, my gaze unwavering. "The mineral dust found on Dr. Finch's boots matches the unique composition of that exact site. A site that shows recent, illicit excavation. He died, Ben. And I believe it was connected to what he was doing out there." The assistant finally dropped his gaze to his hands, which trembled slightly. The petrified wood clattered against the workbench. He was different toward the end, obsessed. He kept talking about a lost artifact, something that would rewrite history. He said it was priceless, beyond anything in any museum. "What kind of artifact?" I pressed, my voice low. He wrung his hands, his breath coming in shallow gasps. He never showed it to me, just drawings, cryptic notes. He was terrified someone else would find it first. He started having these meetings, always late at night, not with other academics. These were different types. They never spoke much, just listened to him, watched him. Did he ever mention their names? What their interest was in this lost artifact? The assistant shook his head, looking utterly lost. No names, just about legacy, about things that should stay buried. He started to look scared himself, especially after those meetings. He told me to stay away from the site, that it was too dangerous. That's when I left. I couldn't be a part of it anymore. I studied him, noting the genuine fear etched on his face. He was clearly under duress, not from me, but from the shadow of Finch's dangerous pursuit. Did he ever mention where this lost artifact might have come from? And that these men, they wanted to control that truth. That's all I know, Seth. I swear. The pieces were beginning to align, forming a picture far more sinister than a simple fall. A forgotten truth, a lost artifact, and enigmatic figures willing to kill to control it. My pursuit of authenticity was a stubborn current, pulling me deeper into troubled waters. The remote estate, once a place of quiet historical contemplation, now felt like the mouth of a dark cave. I guided my vehicle down the gravel track, the wheels crunching against the loose stones, kicking up a plume of fine dust that settled on the ancient oaks lining the driveway. The air was still, heavy with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. But beneath it, I detected the faint metallic tang of unease. The dig site itself was a shallow depression, a carefully excavated scar on the land. Protective tarpaulins, now tattered at the edges, had been thrown back carelessly. The site supervisor, a young academic with wide, nervous eyes, met me at the perimeter. "We tried to keep it secure, Seth," he stammered, gesturing vaguely. "But after the incident, things have been chaotic." I ignored his apologies, my gaze sweeping over the disturbed earth. The scene told a story of its own. Fresh boot prints, distinct from the archaeologist's usual work boots, marred the edges of the excavation. Not just one set, but several, crisscrossing with a purpose that wasn't about careful preservation. A section of newly exposed bedrock, where the historian had reportedly fallen, showed faint but unmistakable scrape marks. They weren't consistent with an accidental slide. They looked like something had been dragged. Kneeling, I ran a gloved hand over the disturbed soil. A faint glimmer caught my eye. Pushing aside a clod of dirt, I found it. A small, irregular shard of fired clay, no larger than my thumb. Its surface was coarse, unglazed, and bore a faint geometric pattern. My breath hitched. This wasn't local earthenware. Its composition, its distinct reddish hue, spoke of a different origin, a different era entirely. Anachronistic. It didn't belong here, not in this stratum, not with the established historical timeline of the estate. It was a misplaced whisper from a forgotten past, a fragment of proof that someone had been here recently, disturbing not just the earth, but history itself. The shard felt cool against my fingertip, a silent testament to illicit activity. Find anything, Seth? The voice belonged to the local sheriff, a man whose patience had worn thinner with each passing day. He stood a few feet away, arms crossed, flanked by a burly deputy. His eyes, usually sharp, now held a weary resignation. The state investigator has already submitted his preliminary findings. Accidental fall, open and shut according to them. Preliminary findings don't account for this, Sheriff. I held up the pottery shard, letting him examine it. He merely grunted, his gaze flicking to the deputy, then back to me. Look, Seth, I respect your work, but there's pressure from above. Big pressure. They want this closed. For the estate's sake, for the family's sake. It's a tragedy, yes, but it's done. He paused, his voice dropping to a low rumble. You're starting to make people uncomfortable. Good, I replied, my voice level, because I'm uncomfortable too. This isn't an accident, and this fragment confirms there's more to this dig than anyone is letting on. The sheriff sighed, rubbing a hand over his jaw. Just be careful, Seth. Some things are best left buried. It was less a warning, more a plea from a man caught between duty and powerful forces. Leaving the dig site, the sheriff's words echoed in my mind. Be careful, not when the truth was calling. I had a hunch, a thread connecting the historian's research to a rumor I'd heard about a private collection, one rumored to contain pieces too rare, too controversial to ever see the light of day. I arrived hours early, blending into the flurry of activity as crates were unloaded and last-minute inspections were carried out. The air in the service alley was thick with the scent of wood polish and nervous ambition. Through a partially open bay door, I could glimpse the back room, a controlled chaos of velvet-draped tables, specialized lighting, and security personnel. Important pieces, no doubt. My focus, however, wasn't on the art. It was on the figures moving around it. He moved with an unsettling grace, his eyes scanning the room, assessing, calculating. He wasn't there for the public spectacle. He was there for something else, something hidden, something illicit. I watched him exchange a quick, almost imperceptible nod with the security guard, a silent acknowledgement of a shared understanding. The auction house, I realized, was just another stage for their clandestine operations. The pottery shard in my pocket felt heavier, a direct link to the very forces at play here. The drive back to my forensic lab was punctuated by the rhythmic thrum of the tires on the asphalt, a stark contrast to the thrumming tension in my chest. Someone was watching me. I unlocked the heavy steel door to my lab, the familiar click echoing in the quiet hallway. Stepping inside, I immediately sensed it. The subtle scent of something foreign, a hint of expensive cologne overlaid with the faintest metallic tang that wasn't my usual reagents. My eyes swept the room. Nothing was overtly disturbed. The specimen jars lined neatly on the shelves, the microscopes covered, the computers powered down, But I knew. The subtle displacement of a loose floor tile near the back wall. The almost imperceptible smudge on the pristine white surface of my main examination table. A mark that hadn't been there when I left. They hadn't wanted to take anything. They had wanted to send a message. They knew I was closing in. The quiet violation of my sanctuary, the silent threat, was more potent than any direct confrontation. This wasn't just about uncovering a truth anymore. It was about surviving it. But burying things wasn't my profession. My profession was unearthing them, understanding them, giving voice to what silence had claimed. I wasn't here for the main event, not yet. I'd arranged a discreet viewing of a few pieces from a recently acquired private collection, ostensibly for academic interest. My true target, however, was the pottery fragment I'd slipped into my pocket hours earlier, the one I'd found near Finch's fall. I needed a closer look, away from the prying eyes of the estate, and the sophisticated equipment here provided a perfect, if risky, opportunity. A junior appraiser, barely out of university, nodded me towards a small, well-lit examination table tucked behind a velvet rope. Just these two, Professor Seth. The Aphrodite juglet and the Aegean amphora shard. 30 minutes, please. The director is very particular about their handling. I nodded, placing my small, portable magnification kit and UV light beside the pristine artifacts. While the appraiser's attention drifted to a commotion over a mislabeled provenance tag, I carefully extracted Finch's fragment. Under the bright, focused beam of my handheld microscope, the surface of Finch's fragment revealed its secrets. The faint striations, initially dismissed as natural wear, showed a peculiar uniformity. Then, the glaze. It mimicked the ancient Aegean technique flawlessly. The slight iridescence, the subtle pitting. But then I saw it. A minute. Almost imperceptible inclusion. A tiny bubble trapped within the glaze. It was too perfect, too uniform in its imperfection, like a flaw deliberately engineered. My mind raced back to my own research, to the specific composition of pigments used by a particular obscure civilization from the Bronze Age. The color palette was a near match, but the binder was wrong. It was a synthetic polymer, a modern compound, barely detectable without high magnification and specialized reagents. This wasn't just an anomaly. This was an incredibly sophisticated forgery. A masterpiece of deception, designed to mimic the exact style and material composition of that very same obscure Bronze Age civilization Finch had been so intensely researching. The kind of forgery that would fool all but the most obsessive specialized eye, like Finch's, or, I now realized, my own. Finch wasn't merely investigating ancient artifacts. He was uncovering a high-stakes forgery ring. A ring so skilled, so meticulous, that their creations could pass for genuine even under rigorous scrutiny, infiltrating the most prestigious collections and auction houses. His fall wasn't tragic. It was a silencing. The Aphrodite juglet and Aegean amphora shard lay before me, innocent and genuine. Yet now I saw them through a new, cynical lens. How many other pieces in this very back room, in this very auction, were equally well-crafted lies? Leaving the auction house, the sterile light of the back room replaced by the late afternoon sun, I felt a shift within me. The academic curiosity that had driven me to the estate had hardened into something more urgent, more dangerous. Finch hadn't just been a historian. He'd been an unwitting detective, and now I was following his lead. I drove straight back to the estate, the sheriff's words now echoing with a different, more ominous resonance. My new understanding of the fragment meant I couldn't either. Entering Finch's study again, the scent of aged paper and leather felt less comforting, more like the lingering presence of a ghost. I no longer saw a scholar's sanctuary, but a battlefield. My earlier search had been for historical discrepancies, not hidden compartments. This time, I went through the room with a different purpose, a different urgency. Finch was a methodical man. If he'd uncovered something this explosive, he would have secured his findings. It felt slightly looser than the rest. I pressed, gently at first, then with more conviction. A faint click, almost imperceptible. One was a slim, leather-bound journal, its pages filled with what looked like a complex series of alphanumeric codes. The other was a small, rolled-up parchment, brittle with age. I carefully unfurled it. It wasn't a historical document, but a map, hand-drawn and meticulously detailed. Not of the estate, not of any local area I recognized, but of a sprawling, ancient city. And scattered across its surface, like constellations, were cryptic symbols and a series of coordinates that meant nothing to me. A signature. Finch hadn't just found a forgery, he'd found the source, or at least a map to it. And now, so had I. The game had just escalated. I was no longer an observer. I was a participant, holding the very threads of a conspiracy that stretched far beyond ancient artifacts, into a present where lives were cheap and legacies were bought and sold. I still felt the faint chill of the auction house's air conditioning as I pocketed the sliver of dark red clay. The appraiser, a florid man obsessed with provenance, had moved on to pacify a disgruntled collector. This brief window of distraction was exactly what I'd needed. The fragment, unassuming to the casual eye, carried a subtle, almost imperceptible pattern on its surface. A series of shallow, uneven ridges that didn't look like natural imperfections. It was too precise, too deliberate for accidental damage. My fingers traced them, a ghost of an ancient script or a unique identifier. I excused myself, feigning a sudden need for a quiet space to review my notes before the main sale. Finding true solitude was impossible, but a small, rarely used office, tucked behind a stack of empty display pedestals, offered a semblance of privacy. I slipped inside, locking the door with a quiet click. My small, battered laptop emerged from my messenger bag. It was custom-built, loaded with specialized forensic decryption software I'd developed over years. Finch's coded map and the encrypted files I'd recovered from the historian's estate were already loaded. The map, initially a jumble of seemingly random lines and symbols, had resisted my initial attempts. The historian had been a master of obscure historical ciphers, and this one was particularly dense. But Finch's fragment. I carefully placed it under my portable microscope, connecting it to the laptop's input. The ridges magnified, revealing themselves not as script, but as a sequence of tiny, almost microscopic notches and depressions. A binary code, perhaps? No, something more organic, tied to the material itself. It reminded me of a system I'd once encountered, used by monastic scribes to mark their most heretical texts. A physical key, embedded in the artifact itself. I cross-referenced the fragment's data with the coded map. The map was not a geographical layout in the conventional sense. It was a network, a web of interconnected points, each labeled with an archaic symbol I now recognized as a variant of the notches on the clay. The fragment was a legend, a Rosetta Stone. My fingers flew across the keyboard, feeding the new parameters into the decryption algorithm. The map began to resolve. Lines connected symbols, forming constellations of names and dates. Not locations, but individuals and organizations. The raw, unadulterated data scrolled down my screen, a torrent of information. The first names that emerged were familiar, at least in academic circles. Wealthy collectors, prominent patrons of history. But their connections on this map were not to reputable institutions. They formed intricate, overlapping circles with shadowy historical societies I'd only ever heard whispered about in hushed tones at conferences. Groups with names like the Chronos Society and the Aegis Keepers. My internal monologue shifted from focused analysis to a growing unease. This was far beyond simple artifact forgery. They spoke of the legacy. Not a collection of objects, but a narrative. A specific version of history, meticulously curated and ruthlessly protected. And the Keepers were its enforcers. The files were an intricate ledger, detailing not only financial transactions but intellectual ones. They cataloged instances where academic papers were suppressed, where archaeological digs were mysteriously shut down, where inconvenient discoveries simply vanished. My breath hitched. This wasn't about monetary value. It was about power over truth itself. One particular entry caught my eye, highlighted in a recurring, almost obsessive manner throughout the encrypted documents: the Prime Chronicon. It was referenced as the linchpin of the legacy, the central piece around which all other manipulated narratives revolved. The historian's notes, intermingled with the encrypted files, spoke of its immense power, its ability to rewrite centuries of understanding. Reveal Discovery. A new section, labeled Current Oversight, suddenly materialized on my screen as another layer of encryption peeled back. It contained a single recent entry. The historian's name was listed, not as an active participant, but as an observer of concern. And directly beneath it, a name I recognized from the estate's guest log: the auction house's chief appraiser, the florid man who had just been distracted by a provenance tag. His role was listed as Custodian Sector 7. My mind raced. The appraiser wasn't just a seller of artifacts, he was a custodian. The historian's death, initially deemed an accident, now screamed of calculated removal. He was an observer of concern because he was getting too close to the Prime Chronicon or threatening the legacy that the keepers so diligently guarded. And the appraiser, his apparent colleague, was one of them. I was no longer just investigating a death. I was unraveling a vast, insidious network that manipulated history itself. And I was doing it from the very heart of their operation, surrounded by individuals who might be keepers themselves. The quiet click of the office door lock suddenly felt flimsy, inadequate. I had to move, and quickly, before the record sale began, before Custodian Sector 7 decided to check on his quiet note-reviewing guest. The sliver of dark red clay, no larger than my thumbnail, felt cool against my palm. A tiny shard of history pilfered from a collection meant for public display. Attendants in crisp uniforms moved with hushed efficiency, adjusting spotlights on pedestals, their movements almost reverent around the ancient pieces. His distraction had been my opportunity, a brief, chaotic window. The fragment I'd slipped into my pocket wasn't just any clay. Under my portable microscope back at the lab, I'd identified trace elements within the unique mineral dust found on the historian's clothes and at the scene. A distinct blend of iron oxides and silicates, indicative of a specific geological origin. This fragment, part of a small, uncatalogued pot from a minor Mesopotamian collection, contained the exact same signature. The appraiser had dismissed it as a later addition, a restoration piece, but my gut told me otherwise. The way it had been hidden, almost deliberately obscured within a larger, more prominent artifact, spoke volumes. I needed to move. This wasn't the place for contemplation. I navigated through the labyrinthine corridors, past crates marked with exotic destinations, the hushed murmurs of art dealers blending into a low drone. My next stop was a quiet, unassuming residence across town, home to a retired curator, a man who had once been a mentor to the deceased historian. If anyone could shed light on the unusual provenance of this clay, or on any hidden societies the historian might have brushed against, it was him. The retired curator's home was a testament to a life lived among antiquities, though in a much more personal, less ostentatious way than the auction house. Bookshelves overflowed, their spines brittle with age, and every surface held a small, intriguing artifact: a Roman coin, a weathered Egyptian scarab, a shard of vibrant Persian tile. The air smelled of old paper and Earl Grey tea. He greeted me with a weary but polite nod. His eyes, magnified by thick spectacles, holding a lifetime of knowledge and, I suspected, a good deal of unspoken regret. "Seth," he said, his voice raspy as he gestured to a worn armchair. "I expected you. Not surprised, given everything." He poured tea from a delicate porcelain pot, his hands trembling slightly. "I need to understand, sir," I began, choosing my words carefully. "The historian's death. It wasn't an accident, and I've found things, anomalies, a unique mineral dust." This was at the auction house. It matches the forensic signature from the scene. The curator's gaze sharpened, fixing on the clay shard. A long silence stretched, punctuated only by the ticking of an antique grandfather clock in the hall. His face, usually a map of scholarly detachment, seemed to tighten, lines deepening around his mouth. He picked up the fragment, turning it over in his liver-spotted fingers, his brow furrowed. "I knew this day would come," he murmured, more to himself than to me. He sighed, a profound exhalation that seemed to carry the weight of years. The historian was reckless. Brilliant, yes, but he pushed too hard, too fast. He set the fragment down, pushing it back towards me. "This clay, it's from the Uruk period, and that specific mineral signature, it points to a very particular, very restricted dig site." "Restricted by whom?" He hesitated, glancing around the room as if unseen ears might be listening. "There are groups, Seth. Organizations that operate outside the purview of academic institutions, even governments. They believe they are safeguarding history, controlling its narrative. They're not merely collectors. They control the flow of archaeological finds, not for preservation, but for power, political influence, financial leverage. They believe certain truths, certain artifacts, are too dangerous for public knowledge. And the historian, he stumbled upon something they wanted hidden?" I pressed, the pieces of the puzzle beginning to align in a terrifying mosaic. The curator nodded slowly. "More than stumbled. He actively sought them out. He was investigating an illicit trade network, one that laundered artifacts through private collections, selling them to the highest bidders, not for profit alone, but to ensure they ended up in certain hands. Hands that would keep them buried, metaphorically speaking. And this mineral dust, this specific Uruk clay, where would they keep such artifacts?" My thoughts immediately jumped to the untouched estate, the historian's final fatal destination. He took another sip of tea, his eyes distant. "There are private estates, Seth. Vast, secluded properties, some with histories stretching back centuries, passed down through families with specific interests. One in particular comes to mind, though I have no direct proof. An estate known as Blackwood Manor. It's located in a remote valley, far from prying eyes. The original owner, a forgotten industrialist from the turn of the century, had an obsession with ancient cultures, particularly those of Mesopotamia. He amassed an enormous collection, most of it never properly catalogued, never seen outside the estate walls. My breath caught. Blackwood Manor, the very estate where the historian had met his end. The unique mineral dust, the Uruk clay, the keepers, and now a specific remote private estate known for harboring uncatalogued ancient artifacts. The tension in the room thickened, a palpable weight. The curator's reluctance had given way to a quiet, desperate warning. "They are powerful, Seth," the curator cautioned, his voice strained. "They will not tolerate exposure." The historian found that out the hard way. His gaze held mine, a silent plea for caution, a recognition of the dangerous path I was now on. The pieces were falling into place, but the picture they formed was far more sinister than I had ever imagined. And it pointed directly to Blackwood Manor. My breath caught. Blackwood Manor. The connection was undeniable, chillingly precise. The tension intensified, a cold knot tightening in my gut. Elias Thorne, the industrialist, the collector, the man whose name had surfaced repeatedly in the periphery of my research into illicit antiquities. My presence here was a calculated risk, a direct path to observing Thorne, who was rumored to be attending, and potentially to glean further insight into his operation. I moved with a practiced nonchalance. A casual observer, my eyes, however, were anything but. They scanned the faces, the security details, the very artifacts themselves, looking for any telltale signs, any misplaced detail that might betray a secret. Thorne arrived, a figure of imposing stature, flanked by two formidable security operatives. He moved with an almost predatory grace, his gaze sweeping over the pieces with an owner's possessiveness, not a buyer's anticipation. He lingered over a Sumerian tablet, its cuneiform script perfectly preserved. Too perfect, perhaps. I noticed a subtle sheen on its surface, a faint, almost imperceptible iridescence that reminded me of the mineral dust I'd found at Blackwood Manor. This wasn't just a collection. It was a front. Later that night, under the cloak of a moonless sky, I approached Thorne's remote private estate. It was a sprawling complex, less a manor and more a fortress, nestled deep within a heavily forested valley. But I had studied the blueprints, noted the geological surveys of the area, and identified a single narrow subterranean conduit, originally designed for drainage, that led beneath the main structure. It was a long shot, a desperate measure, but my options were dwindling. The crawl was arduous, the air thick with damp earth and the metallic tang of stagnant water. My muscles ached, my clothes became a muddy second skin, but I pushed on, driven by the images of the historian's broken body and the Uruk clay. After what felt like an eternity, the conduit opened into a larger, drier space. I emerged into a maintenance tunnel, carefully brushing away clinging mud, my senses on high alert. The tunnel led me to a heavy, unmarked door, cleverly concealed behind a bank of electrical conduits. My lockpicking kit, a relic from my more adventurous archaeological days, felt clumsy in my trembling hands. But the tumblers clicked, and the door swung inward silently. I stepped into a low-lit, cavernous space, a state-of-the-art forgery workshop. The air here was sharp with the smell of resins, glues, and the faint, acrid scent of pulverized stone. Workbenches lined the walls, littered with an array of specialized tools: micro-chisels, laser etchers, high-magnification microscopes, and custom-designed aging chambers. This was where history was rewritten, where authenticity was manufactured with frightening skill. I recognized the specific mineral dust, now airborne here, clinging to surfaces, an invisible signature. This was where the historian's death had been orchestrated, where the anachronism had been born. My gaze drifted to a far wall, dominated by a seamless stretch of reinforced concrete. Too uniform, too blank. My instincts screamed at me. I ran my hand along its surface, feeling a subtle vibration, a faint hum, a hidden mechanism. I searched for a seam, a panel, anything. My fingers found a barely perceptible groove, and with a surge of adrenaline, I pressed firmly. A soft whirring sound filled the space, and a section of the wall slid inward, revealing a heavy vault-like door. This was it. The vault door was a formidable barrier of polished steel, secured by a complex biometric scanner. My forensic training kicked in. I knew these systems could be bypassed, not by brute force, but by exploiting their reliance on specific biological markers. I located the hidden diagnostic port, a tiny, almost invisible panel, and with a small, specialized device, I began to probe its systems, overriding the biometric lock. The mechanism groaned, and the massive door swung open, revealing its true treasures. Inside, bathed in a soft archival light, was a breathtaking, horrifying display. Shelves rose to the ceiling, laden with a trove of genuine, priceless artifacts, clearly stolen from legitimate archaeological sites. Intact Mayan stelae, their intricate carvings speaking of forgotten gods, gold funerary masks from ancient Persia, illuminated manuscripts from medieval Europe, and row upon row of perfectly preserved Mesopotamian cylinder seals, their intricate designs glowing. These weren't forgeries. These were the real deal, pilfered from the earth, stripped of their context, held captive by a collector's greed. The sheer audacity of it left me momentarily stunned. This was the Keeper's true legacy, not just manufactured history, but stolen heritage. A red light flashed, pulsing erratically. Thorne's advanced security systems had detected my presence. My bypass had been a temporary reprieve, a blip that had now been flagged. I had triggered something. I didn't have time to fully process what I was seeing. Footsteps, heavy and urgent, echoed from the workshop outside. I spun, the vault door now a gaping maw behind me, a beacon for my pursuers. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the blare of the alarm. I glanced around, desperate. The only way out was back through the workshop, past where the footsteps were rapidly approaching. Now, I bolted, the adrenaline coursing through me, my mind racing for an escape route, a narrow window, anything to avoid capture. The game had changed. I was no longer an observer. I was the hunted. Priceless antiquities, still crated or draped in velvet, lined the walls, waiting for their moment under the gavel. I'd chosen this place for its transient nature, the constant ebb and flow of people and objects, a perfect camouflage for my clandestine operation. The hum of distant chatter and the occasional clang of equipment provided a strange, unsettling soundtrack to my work. My portable forensic workstation, a compact marvel of engineering, sat on a scarred oak table surrounded by the ghosts of forgotten estates. On its screen, I scrolled through a sequence of high-resolution photographs, each one a pixelated whisper of a truth I was rapidly assembling. The images were from Blackwood Manor, Thorne's sprawling, secretive estate, specifically from the areas I'd managed to access, discreetly after the initial police sweep. My initial gut feeling, the one that had gnawed at me since Finch's initial discovery, was no longer a vague intuition. It was a cold, hard fact, meticulously reconstructed. The mineral dust, that unique, shimmering particulate I'd found embedded in Finch's clothing. Then later, in the crags of the historian's boots. I zoomed in on a close-up shot of a flagstone in a rarely used antechamber at Thorne's estate. There it was, a faint, almost invisible residue clinging to the mortar lines, reflecting the camera flash like scattered starlight. A geological match. The same specific, rare mineral composite. It wasn't just near the estate, it was within it, in a private, inaccessible wing that the official investigation had deemed irrelevant. Next, the Uruk clay. My fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up comparative spectral analysis results. The clay I'd extracted from Finch's wound, the clay found near the historian's final resting place, and now, the minute flecks I'd painstakingly lifted from a discarded, mud-caked trowel found in a forgotten storage room within Thorne's estate. Identical. A perfect chemical and isotopic signature match. The trowel itself, an antique piece, bore faint, almost imperceptible etchings. Symbols that, when cross-referenced with my growing database of keeper iconography, confirmed its provenance. It wasn't just a gardening tool, it was a ritual implement. My mind raced, connecting the disparate threads. Finch, the quiet, meticulous archivist, had stumbled onto something significant. He hadn't just been researching the keepers. He'd likely uncovered their current operations, their illicit trade. The Uruk clay, a signature material in the artifacts they coveted, had been his undoing. His tragic fall at Blackwood Manor. The official report cited an accidental slip on a loose stone. But the trace evidence I'd found, the specific mineral dust from the antechamber, the faint residue of the Uruk clay on his person, the absence of certain injuries consistent with a simple fall, and the presence of others suggesting a struggle, painted a different picture. He hadn't fallen. He'd been thrown, perhaps after an argument, after discovering something he wasn't meant to see within Thorne's private collection, something directly linked to the keeper's illicit activities. He was an expert in ancient history, precisely the kind of individual who could identify the true value and origin of uncatalogued artifacts. He knew too much, too. Thorne. his meticulously curated image as a benevolent patron of the arts, a collector of exquisite taste, was a smokescreen. The artifacts weren't just being traded, they were being preserved, hidden from public scrutiny, perhaps even activated for some arcane purpose. My jaw tightened. The scale of it was staggering. A prominent figure, deeply entrenched, leveraging his wealth and influence to maintain a secret society dedicated to trafficking and hoarding ancient relics, and murdering those who got too close. The police, or at least elements within the local constabulary, had been compromised. Their investigation into both deaths conveniently steered away from Thorne and his estate. That explained the superficiality of their initial examination, the quick acceptance of the accidental fall narrative for the historian. A tremor of unease ran through me. I was no longer just a forensic anthropologist. I was a target. Every piece of data I compiled, every photograph I annotated, was a nail in Thorne's coffin, and potentially in mine. I began compiling my final report, a meticulously structured document, cross-referencing every exhibit, every analysis. The narrative had to be unassailable, bulletproof. It needed to speak for itself, even if I couldn't. I made multiple encrypted backups, sending copies to trusted, independent colleagues I knew would act should anything happen to me. It was a calculated risk, but the truth deserved to see the light. The auctioneer's voice, amplified and booming, suddenly cut through the backroom's muted sounds, announcing the start of the record sale. Ladies and gentlemen, we begin tonight with lot number 1. The crescendo of polite applause underscored the urgency of my situation. Thorne, perhaps even now, was in the main hall mingling with the elite, his hands stained with the blood of 2 innocent men, his estate a repository of stolen history. The clock was ticking, not just on the auction, but on my window of opportunity. I packed my workstation, the weight of the evidence pressing down on me, knowing that the next few hours would decide everything. The confrontation was coming. I'd chosen this place for its unique blend of public spectacle and private access, a perfect stage for a calculated unveiling. My pulse was a steady drum against my temples, a counterpoint to the hushed murmurs of the auction staff preparing for the main event. I stood by a particularly large crate, ostensibly examining its contents through a small gap in the slats. Inside, a sarcophagus lid, purportedly Roman, gleamed dully. My real attention, however, was on the entrance. The plan was simple, direct, and inherently dangerous. A quiet commotion signaled his arrival. He swept in, flanked by 2 burly security personnel, his gaze imperious, a predator surveying his domain. His eyes, sharp and calculating, immediately found me. A faint smile, devoid of warmth, touched his lips. He was used to being in control. "Professor Seth," Thorne greeted, his voice a low purr. "Admiring the collection? I trust you find it authentic?" I turned, allowing a neutral expression to settle on my face. Authenticity is a fascinating concept, Thorne. So often, it's a matter of perspective, isn't it? His smile tightened. Indeed, though in this business, it's often a matter of provenance, and mine is impeccable. He gestured vaguely at the crates around us. These pieces have been vetted by the best. Perhaps not by the most thorough, I countered, stepping away from the sarcophagus crate. I reached into my jacket, my hand brushing against the cold, smooth surface of the evidence I carried. His security personnel subtly shifted, their eyes flicking to my movement. Thorne, however, merely raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "And you believe yourself more thorough?" he challenged, a hint of amusement in his tone. "A forensic anthropologist dabbling in art history? A curious detour from your usual. Cadavers." Dr. Finch was more than a cadaver to me, I said, my voice hardening. He was a colleague, a friend, a tragic fall. "Caused by a push," I corrected, pulling out a small, sealed evidence bag. Finch's skull, a minute detail, easily missed by anyone not looking for specific anachronistic trauma. Thorne's eyes narrowed, his gaze fixed on the bag. And what does a shard of pottery prove? This isn't just any pottery. I explained, my voice low but firm, ensuring my words carried over the distant hum of the auction house. This fragment contains trace elements of a specific clay unique to a particular, long-abandoned kiln site in the Carpathian foothills. A site Dr. Finch had just rediscovered. A site that yielded artifacts belonging to a forgotten culture. A culture the Keepers have been trying to erase from history, or rather, hoard for themselves. I watched Thorne closely. The mention of the Keepers hit home. His jaw clenched, and his eyes darted to his security. The façade was cracking. More importantly, I continued, pressing my advantage. The fracture pattern on this shard matches precisely a unique, decorative motif found on the base of a figurine 1 that was part of the very collection Dr. Finch was researching at your estate. A figurine that, I might add, was mysteriously absent after his accident. I held up a high-resolution photograph on my phone, displaying a detailed image of the figurine's base, complete with the distinctive pattern. This figurine, Thorne, was never meant to be publicly seen. It was part of the true collection, the one you kept hidden, the one that proved Dr. Finch's theories about this forgotten legacy. He was about to publish, to expose the Keepers and your illicit trade in these unique artifacts. Thorne's composure finally shattered. A vein throbbed in his neck. This is preposterous, fabricated evidence. Is it? I challenged, my gaze unwavering. Because the forensic analysis confirms the clay's origin, the fracture match, and the fact that the figurine's material is identical to other pieces I've identified in your private, undisclosed vaults. Vaults, I might add, that contain the true treasures, not these cleverly disguised fakes and lesser pieces you intend to sell today. His security personnel moved, one stepping forward, hand drifting to a holstered weapon. You pushed him, Thorne, I stated, my voice ringing with certainty in the suddenly tense back room. Dr. Finch was about to expose your entire operation, the true extent of the Keeper's control over these ancient secrets. The security agent lunged. I was ready. My experience in hostile environments, my years of navigating treacherous archaeological sites had taught me to anticipate. I sidestepped the first man, using his momentum against him, shoving him into a stack of empty packing crates. The wood splintered with a crash. This auction house is full of witnesses, Thorne, I shouted, backing away, my eyes scanning for an exit. And my evidence is already on its way to the authorities. The second security agent moved, faster than the first. I ducked under a swinging arm, the force of his blow rattling the air near my ear. I was trapped between crates, ancient history, and impending violence. I knew that door. It led to a labyrinthine series of service corridors, a back route that could take me clear of the building or deeper into its bowels. It was a gamble, but staying here was a death sentence. With a surge of adrenaline, I launched myself over a low stack of velvet-draped pedestals, scattering them with a clatter. The pursuit was on. The climax was here, playing out not in the quiet of a laboratory, but amidst the dusty, priceless relics of a forgotten world. My only hope was to outrun them and pray the evidence had already begun its work. The second security agent moved, faster than the first. Thorne, eyes blazing, pointed towards a rarely used service door at the far end of the back, his voice a guttural command I couldn't quite decipher over the thud of the agent's heavy boots. He wasn't pointing to the door for my escape. He was directing his muscle to box me in, to ensure I didn't reach it, or worse, to drag me through it. My hand instinctively closed around a loose metal rod I'd noticed wedged between two crates earlier, a forgotten piece of shelving. It was heavy, cold. Not a weapon I wanted, but the only one I had. The first agent, surprisingly quick for his bulk, lunged again. I pivoted, using the rod to deflect his arm, the clang echoing sharply. The distraction was brief, but it bought me a split second. I saw the service door swing inward at that precise moment, Not from Thorn's side, but from the outside, revealing the stark glare of flashlights and the silhouettes of armed officers. A chorus of shouts erupted, cutting through the tense quiet of the back room. Thorn's eyes widened, a flicker of genuine shock replacing the fury. The agents froze, caught between their orders and the sudden, overwhelming presence of law enforcement. "Police, drop your weapons," a commanding voice boomed. Thorn, ever the opportunist, made a desperate dash towards a side exit I hadn't noticed, a narrow gap between stacks of velvet-draped display cases. But he was too late. Two federal agents, moving with practiced efficiency, cut him off, their arms locking around his. He struggled, a visceral snarl tearing from his throat, but they were too strong. The metal rod clattered from my grasp, my hands suddenly feeling hollow. The back room, once a stage for silent conspiracy, became a hive of activity. Officers swarmed, methodically securing the perimeter, photographing the scene and cataloging the crates. Each one, I knew, held a piece of stolen history, evidence of Thorn's vast illicit network. The air hummed with the crackle of police radios, the low murmur of instructions, and the occasional sharp clink of handcuffs. I watched as Thorn, his face a mask of defeated rage, was led away, his empire crumbling around him in a cacophony of official procedure. It took hours for the initial processing to conclude. I recounted the events, my voice hoarse, the details sharp and precise as I explained how the anomalies in the historian's remains had led me here, to this very room, to these very artifacts. The discovery was staggering. Behind false walls and beneath cleverly disguised platforms, the federal investigators unearthed a trove of antiquities far grander than even I had suspected. Tablets inscribed with forgotten languages, sarcophagi containing mummified remains from unrecorded dynasties, scrolls detailing rituals long erased from public knowledge, all destined for a black market that sought to rewrite history for profit. The true scale of the keepers began to unravel in the subsequent days. With Thorn's capture, the intricate web of patrons, collectors, and clandestine academics who had supported his operations was exposed. The meticulous forensic work I had done on the historian's death, coupled with the evidence seized from the auction house, provided irrefutable proof of a coordinated effort to control historical narratives, to manipulate the past for their own obscure ends. News reports, initially cautious, exploded with the revelations. The very notion of historical truth, once considered immutable, was now seen as a fragile construct, vulnerable to those who sought to twist it. The emotional and psychological toll was immense. The adrenaline had faded, replaced by a profound weariness that settled deep in my bones. I found myself staring blankly at the sterile walls of my temporary quarters, the scent of dust and ancient decay still clinging to my clothes, to my memory. The faces of the deceased, the historian, the countless anonymous individuals whose remains I had examined over the years seemed to coalesce into a silent chorus. I had been their voice. The truth, when it finally emerged, was often brutal, unvarnished. It didn't offer comfort or neat endings, only clarity. This case had been more than just a murder investigation. It had been an excavation of a forgotten malignancy, a testament to the relentless human impulse to control, to hoard, even to destroy the very foundations of shared knowledge. My science, my meticulous pursuit of the smallest detail, had been the chisel that slowly, painstakingly chipped away at layers of deceit, revealing the bedrock of reality beneath. I stood by a window overlooking the city, the urban sprawl a stark contrast to the ancient secrets I had just unearthed. The world felt different now, sharper, more dangerous. My role, once confined to the quiet sanctity of the laboratory or the measured pace of an archaeological dig, had shifted. The confrontation in the back room, the desperate scramble, the direct threat to my life, it had awakened something. A realization that the pursuit of truth, especially in the face of such powerful, entrenched interests, often demanded more than just academic rigor. Perhaps, I mused, My future lay not just in piecing together the past, but in actively protecting it. A more dangerous path, certainly, one that moved beyond the purely academic into the direct, relentless pursuit of justice, armed with the quiet power of scientific observation. And I, Seth, had just scratched the surface.